Morning.
Look, this is welcome news to a lot of people. I think 1 in 15 of us have been affected by these kinds of scams. But how will it work in practice?
Well, I think that's the big question on everyone's lips, Isabel. This is the type of policy that has come straight out of the focus groups. I mean, this is the type of retail politics that people want to see from the government, because we've all been annoyed by these scams and these cold calls, and some of us have even been unfortunate enough to have lost money through them. So I think it appeals to a broad range of the electorate, but the devil will be in the detail as to whether or not this can actually be implemented in a way that has the effects that Rishi Sunak and the Home Secretary want to see, because ultimately they can legislate in the UK, they can put in place these task forces to stop it, but if ultimately you've got someone from a foreign land who wants to call into the UK to conduct one of these scams, there's very little to stop them. So the blanket ban on cold calling seems to be the way that they're going about that, but whether or not that's going to work in the way that the pension scam scheme worked previously, we don't know, because ultimately this is going to be a block on every single cold call that you might get.
Well, I suppose that's the template then that the government will be rolling out, as you mentioned, the 2019 ban on pension cold calls. But if it just gives people that little bit of reassurance that they know if they are getting a cold call, it will be illegal, and therefore reducing the scams. Something's got to be done. It's costing £7 billion a year, which is a huge impact on the economy.
£7 billion a year, 1 in 15 people impacted by it. Quite extraordinary numbers. And yes, I think the Prime Minister is right to want to crack down on this. But I think there's one important component missing here, which is the education of people about these scams. And I think we should be empowering individuals, especially those perhaps of certain generations where this is a new phenomenon, where they're not necessarily sure what a scam looks like, what might be said in these scam phone calls, to educate those audiences, to allow them to make their own decision about what's right and what's wrong. And I think that's the one component of this policy that's missing that could have a big impact, as well as the legislative and more sort of legal procedures that Rishi Sunak's proposing here. So I do think it's going to be a popular policy on the doorstep, but whether or not it works is a completely different question.
I've got to ask you about Sue Gray, Leon, whilst we've got you. This is the lady who's queen of the inquiries. Of course, she investigated Partygate. It's reported that she's refusing to cooperate with the investigation into her own conduct and whether or not she was discussing joining the Labour Party as Chief of Staff while she was investigating possible breaches within Downing Street.
There's something that just doesn't quite smell right about this story, Isabel, and I think that is what is going to be on the mind of particularly Keir Starmer, is that has he, in trying to appoint Sue Gray as his Chief of Staff, has he put his foot in it by making Labour look as if they're up to things that are perhaps underhand, that aren't done by the book? And I think that is one of Keir Starmer's key pledges to the public, is that he is whiter than white, cleaner than clean, and yet this whole procedure seems to be throwing that into disrepute. So I do think that Keir Starmer has potentially going to be regretting the decision to appoint Sue Gray. And I think it's only right and proper that, given she was so close to those in government, the Conservative government, it's only right and proper that she takes on that position with the Labour Party after the general election. Otherwise, there could be political gains that are gained from Sue Gray's appointment that are particularly unfair. So I think this is a story that's going to rumble and rumble. I don't think we've necessarily heard the end of it because, of course, the report itself has yet to be released.